In the shadow of the Iron Curtain, beneath the grand pronouncements of socialist equality and the promise of a workers' paradise, millions of Soviet children learned a fundamental lesson that no classroom could teach. Survival required resourcefulness, and sometimes that meant finding ways to earn money in a system that officially claimed money shouldn't matter. The Union of Soviet Socialist Republics presented itself to the world as a nation where basic needs were guaranteed, where education was free, where healthcare was universal, and where the corrupting influence of capitalism had been swept away by revolutionary fervor. Yet the reality on the ground, in the communal apartments of Moscow, the provincial towns of Ukraine, and the remote villages of Siberia, told a different story entirely. This is the untold history of how Soviet children navigated an economy of scarcity, official ideology, and underground markets to contribute to their families' survival and their own futures. The first and most officially sanctioned method through which Soviet children could earn money was through the state-organized collection of recyclable materials, a system that began in earnest during the 1960s and expanded dramatically throughout the Brezhnev era. The Soviet economy, perpetually struggling with resource allocation and production inefficiencies, established a nationwide network of collection points called Vitorsirio, or secondary raw materials centers. These facilities paid citizens, including children, for bringing in scrap metal, waste paper, glass bottles, and textiles. The system was brilliantly designed from the state's perspective. It addressed chronic material shortages, instilled socialist values of conservation and collective contribution, and provided a legal avenue for citizens to supplement their income without undermining official ideology. For children, this became a genuine economic opportunity. A kilogram of scrap paper might fetch 5 kopecks, while a kilogram of ferrous metal could bring 15 to 20 kopecks. These sums, seemingly trivial, held real purchasing power in an economy where a loaf of bread cost 18 kopecks and a bottle of kvass cost 10. The collection of recyclables became a fixture of Soviet childhood, particularly in urban areas where materials were more abundant and collection points more accessible. Children would scour courtyards, basements, and construction sites for discarded materials. Groups of friends would organize expeditions to abandoned buildings or industrial areas, competing to see who could haul the most impressive load to the collection center. The state newspaper, Pionerskaya Pravda, regularly published stories celebrating young collectors who had contributed exceptional quantities of materials to the socialist economy, framing their efforts as patriotic acts rather than economic necessity. In 1975, the All-Union Pioneer Organization reported that Soviet schoolchildren had collected over 2 million tons of scrap metal and over 1 million tons of waste paper in a single year. These were not merely symbolic gestures. The materials collected by children and other citizens genuinely fed back into Soviet industry, where chronic inefficiency and waste meant that recycled materials often proved more reliable than planned production quotas. Behind the official celebration of these young collectors lay a more complex reality. Many children engaged in this work not out of pioneering spirit, but because their families desperately needed the supplemental income. The official Soviet wage system, while providing employment security and basic stability, often left families struggling, particularly those with multiple children or single parents. A mother working as a factory seamstress might earn 90 to 100 rubles per month, while a father employed as a construction worker might bring home 120 to 150 rubles. With rent subsidized and basic foodstuffs price-controlled, these wages could sustain a family. But they left little room for anything beyond bare necessities. The extra 5 to 10 rubles a month that a child might earn from collecting recyclables could mean the difference between having enough for new school supplies or going without, between buying a small toy or having nothing for a birthday. The second avenue through which Soviet children earned money was through agricultural work, particularly during the summer months when schools closed and the demands of collective farms reached their peak. The Soviet agricultural system, plagued by inefficiency and hampered by collectivization policies that had destroyed traditional farming knowledge and incentive structures, relied heavily on mobilized labor from cities and towns during critical periods like planting and harvest. Students from the 5th grade onward were regularly sent to collective farms for periods ranging from 2 weeks to the entire summer break. While this labor was officially framed as voluntary participation in building socialism and was often unpaid for younger students, older teenagers could earn actual wages for their work. A 16-year-old student working on a collective farm during the summer of 1978 might earn between 40 and 70 rubles for a month of labor, depending on the type of work and the farm's productivity. The agricultural work assigned to students varied widely. Younger children might be tasked with relatively light duties, such as weeding vegetable plots or collecting potato beetles, work that was tedious and time-consuming, but not physically demanding. Older teenagers found themselves performing genuine agricultural labor, operating machinery, loading trucks, working in processing facilities, or spending long days bent over in fields harvesting potatoes, beets, or cabbage. The conditions were often harsh. Students slept in dormitories with minimal amenities, worked long hours under the supervision of farm managers who viewed them as necessary labor rather than young people to be nurtured, and ate cafeteria food that was frequently worse than what they received at school. Accidents were not uncommon. In 1982, the Soviet Ministry of Health reported that agricultural work accidents involving students had resulted in over 3,000 injuries requiring hospitalization. Though the true number was likely higher given the tendency of local authorities to underreport incidents that might reflect poorly on their management. Despite these hardships, many students genuinely needed the money they could earn through agricultural work. For teenagers from families facing economic pressure, a summer on a collective farm represented an opportunity to earn money for clothing, books, or even to help with family expenses. Some students saved their agricultural earnings for years, accumulating the funds necessary to purchase coveted items like a decent bicycle, a radio, or even to contribute to a family's savings toward a cooperative apartment. The system also revealed the deep contradictions within Soviet ideology. The state proclaimed the dignity of agricultural labor and the importance of connecting students with the working class. Yet the very need to mobilize students for farm work demonstrated the fundamental failure of collectivized agriculture to function efficiently. The money students earned came not from the abundance of socialism, but from the desperation of a system unable to feed itself without constant emergency measures. The third method through which Soviet children earned money existed in a gray zone between official tolerance and illegal activity: the resale of goods in short supply. The Soviet economy operated under a system of chronic shortage, where consumer goods were often unavailable, regardless of whether one had money to purchase them. This created opportunities for those willing to navigate the complex world of Soviet retail. Children, particularly those in major cities with access to better-stocked stores, could purchase items in limited supply and resell them for a profit in areas where these goods were unavailable. A child in Moscow might purchase popular books, records, or small consumer goods and resell them to relatives or contacts in provincial cities for a markup. The practice required knowledge of what was available where, access to transportation, and a network of potential buyers. This activity intensified during the 1970s and 1980s as the gap between Moscow and Leningrad and the rest of the Soviet Union widened. A pair of imported jeans purchased in a Moscow commission shop for 50 rubles might be resold in a Ukrainian provincial town for 70 or 80 rubles. Foreign chewing gum, unavailable in most Soviet stores, but occasionally found in special shops or obtained from tourists, could be resold piece by piece to schoolmates for a substantial markup. Children whose parents traveled abroad or had access to foreign goods through their work occupied privileged positions in these informal markets. A child whose father worked in the diplomatic service or in foreign trade might have access to items from Berioska stores, special shops where foreign currency could be used to purchase Western goods. These items, even in small quantities, could be converted into significant sums through careful resale. The Soviet authorities viewed such activity with ambivalence. On one hand, speculation and private trade contradicted socialist principles and were technically illegal under various statutes. On the other hand, these informal markets served a function that the official economy could not. They distributed goods to where they were needed and wanted. As long as the activity remained small-scale and didn't challenge the state's authority, enforcement was often lax. Children engaged in minor resale activities rarely faced serious consequences unless they were particularly brazen or unlucky. However, the practice taught lessons that the Soviet education system never intended. Young people learned that official rules were flexible, that personal connections mattered more than official procedures, that scarcity created opportunity, and that the gap between socialist rhetoric and economic reality could be profited from if one was clever and careful. The fourth avenue for earning money was through the provision of services, particularly tutoring and assistance with academic work. The Soviet education system, while providing universal free education, created intense pressure on students to perform well academically. Success in school determined access to higher education, which in turn determined career prospects and quality of life. This pressure created demand for private tutoring, particularly in subjects like mathematics, physics, chemistry, and foreign languages. Older students who excelled in these subjects could earn money by tutoring younger students, either peers who struggled with coursework or children in lower grades whose parents were willing to pay for additional help. The rates varied considerably depending on location, subject, and the tutor's reputation. In Moscow, during the early 1980s, a capable high school student might charge 3 to 5 rubles per hour for tutoring, a significant sum considering that this was roughly 3% of an average monthly wage. The tutoring market expanded particularly during the months leading up to important examinations. Students preparing for university entrance exams, which were highly competitive and could determine one's entire future, were especially likely to seek additional help. Parents, desperate to give their children every possible advantage, would pay substantial sums for tutoring from students who had successfully navigated these exams themselves or who demonstrated exceptional knowledge in key subjects. The system created a hidden educational economy that ran parallel to the official school system. Teachers themselves often provided private tutoring for additional income, but student tutors offered a more affordable alternative for families with limited means. Beyond academic tutoring, children and teenagers could earn money by providing various services within their communities. Older children might earn money by helping elderly neighbors with shopping, carrying heavy items, or performing minor repairs and maintenance tasks. In the winter, shoveling snow from courtyards and pathways could earn a few rubles. During the summer, tending to gardens or helping with household tasks provided opportunities for income. These arrangements were typically informal, negotiated directly between families, and operated on the basis of personal relationships rather than formal contracts. The amounts earned were modest, but they represented genuine economic contributions in a society where every ruble mattered. The fifth, and perhaps most revealing method, through which Soviet children earned money was through participation in the underground economy, the vast informal market system that Soviet citizens called nalevo, meaning on the left or on the side. This shadow economy encompassed everything from small-scale black market trading to the provision of goods and services outside official channels. Children participated in this economy in various ways, often serving as intermediaries or assistants in transactions that their parents or other adults organized. A child might be sent to purchase items from unofficial sources, to deliver goods or messages, or to watch for authorities while transactions took place. The underground economy flourished because the official Soviet economy failed to provide goods and services that people needed and wanted. Children's participation in the underground economy took many forms. In the Baltic republics, where Western influence was stronger and consumer culture more developed, children might assist parents in producing goods for unofficial sale. In Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, families often produced handicrafts, clothing, or food items that they sold through informal networks. Children would help with production, assist with sales, or serve as couriers delivering goods to buyers. In major cities, children might work as unofficial vendors, selling flowers, food items, or small goods in areas where official retail was inadequate. Near train stations and metro stops, children could be found selling newspapers, cigarettes purchased wholesale from official stores, and resold individually, or seasonal items like ice cream in summer or hot tea in winter. The most economically significant aspect of children's participation in the underground economy involved their role in the cultivation and sale of produce from private plots. Despite the collectivization of agriculture, Soviet citizens were permitted to maintain small private plots where they could grow vegetables, fruits, and raise small animals. The produce from these plots could be sold at collective farm markets, where prices were determined by supply and demand rather than state decree. These markets became crucial sources of fresh food for urban populations and significant sources of income for rural families. Children played essential roles in this system, helping to tend the plots, harvest produce, and sell goods at market. A family with a productive private plot and children old enough to help could earn substantial supplemental income. During the peak season, a family might earn an additional 50 to 100 rubles per month from market sales, a significant addition to official wages. The work was demanding. Children would rise early to help harvest vegetables before school, spend evenings weeding and watering, and dedicate weekends to market sales. At the markets, children would help display produce, negotiate with customers, and handle transactions while their parents managed the stall. The experience provided a practical education in economics, negotiation, and market dynamics that contradicted everything taught in official Soviet schools about the superiority of planned economies over market chaos. Children learned that quality mattered, that presentation affected sales, that prices fluctuated based on supply and demand, and that personal relationships with regular customers could ensure steady income. These lessons, absorbed through direct experience, created a generation that understood the gap between socialist theory and economic reality. The various methods through which Soviet children earned money reveal fundamental contradictions at the heart of the Soviet system. The state proclaimed that it had eliminated the exploitation of labor, yet children worked long hours in difficult conditions for modest compensation. The ideology insisted that socialism had transcended the crude materialism of capitalism, yet families struggled financially, and children sought ways to earn money for basic needs and simple pleasures. The system claimed to provide for all citizens equally, yet significant disparities existed between Moscow and the provinces, between families with connections and those without. between those who could navigate the informal economy and those who could not. The long-term consequences of these childhood economic experiences proved profound. The generation of Soviet citizens who came of age in the 1970s and 1980s, who had spent their childhoods collecting scrap metal, working on collective farms, reselling goods, tutoring classmates, and participating in the underground economy, understood the Soviet system's failures intimately. They had seen firsthand that the planned economy couldn't provide basic consumer goods, that collectivized agriculture couldn't feed the nation without emergency measures, that official wages often proved insufficient, and that survival required operating outside official channels. When the Soviet Union collapsed between 1989 and 1991, this generation possessed skills and knowledge that proved valuable in the chaotic transition to market economics. They understood scarcity, they knew how to identify opportunities, they had experience with informal markets, and they harbored few illusions about socialist economics. The story of how children earned money in the USSR is ultimately a story about the gap between ideology and reality, between the promises of a system and its actual functioning. The Soviet state built an elaborate ideological structure, proclaiming the creation of a new type of society where material concerns would fade as abundance was achieved through rational planning. Yet the children of this system learned that survival required hustle, that scarcity was permanent, that official rules were guidelines rather than absolute constraints, and that the informal economy often worked better than the formal one. These lessons, learned through direct experience in the daily struggle to earn a few extra rubles, shaped a generation's understanding of economics and society in ways that no amount of propaganda could overcome. The children who collected scrap metal in Soviet courtyards, who harvested potatoes on collective farms, who resold goods in short supply, who tutored their peers, and who participated in the shadow economy, grew up to witness and participate in the dismantling of the system that had shaped their childhoods. The skills they had learned in navigating Soviet economic reality proved more valuable than the ideology they had been taught in school. A final irony that the architects of the Soviet system never anticipated.